does it anymore. Not many people that I know. Sir? Yeah, I sure do. I got no problem using aluminum foil. I don't use it too much. For ribs, for me, I cook them basically till they're looking real good, and I always figure at that point they've picked up a lot of smoke flavor. There's a nice bark on them. They don't need to keep hanging out, you know. And I'll wrap them in foil. Not for too long. I don't want to decimate them, you know, but it helps tenderize them up. Let's face it, like it or not, folks like when them meat and bone kind of come off pretty quick when they go to eat it. You know, we consider all day being purists that that's wrong. But the bottom line is when a guy walks into your restaurant, how does he want his rib to come off of the bone? Exactly. You know, now I'm not saying turn them into mush, but wrapping them in foil will release that bone from the meat. And if you get it just right, it'll look good and please me and you. And when the guy goes to bite it, a whole bunch of it will come off the bone, and he's happy. And even judges, even in barbecue judges, they'll tell you all this bullshit, but they like them tender too. So, you know, I'll do that. And then if you like to try and get them back crunchy, just put them back on. So yeah, I have no problem using aluminum foil. Just don't overdo it, you know, because it will kind of leach some of the flavor out of the food, and it will soften it up. You know, sometimes ribs, I don't mind my ribs a little chewy, so I'll cook them with nothing till they might still be a little chewy and a little bit of crunchy on the outside, and I think that's pretty good eating. But I would never try turning that in. So yeah, I don't have a problem using foil. And with everything, I don't. My briskets, I'll wrap them. Sort of the same answer. When it gets around 170, 180 degrees, that thing's not going to get any more flavor, any more bark on it. It's just going to keep. I'm going to dry it out. I might as well just wrap it and get it done. You know, and pork if I'm in a hurry. Pork I'll just let hang. I don't mind that. 'Cause by the time you chop it, mix it all together, if there's some crunchy stuff on the outside, if I got time, pork I'll wait it out. I won't bother wrapping that. But briskets and ribs, I'll usually wrap them. I don't have any kind of special rules like that that, you know, that hang my hat on that, oh my God, you can't ever do something or you should do something like that. If you're doing something I never heard of, I want to know about it. Maybe I'll like it. Yeah, Paul. Yeah, you know, I've kind of gotten away from putting liquid on them for that reason. I'll usually drizzle them with a little bit of, in the barbecue contest world, we use that blue bottled soft margarine. It's really an embarrassment that that's what we use, but the stuff somehow gives it a nice sheen. So usually, I used to do that to sugar and apple juice and honey and all kinds of stuff, and I found the same thing. My ribs are kind of soaked out and sogged, and it really wasn't what I wanted. And some of these guys can do it with excellent results. I have had the same kind of thing. And same with a brisket, actually. I've taken a wrap of my briskets fat side down for the same reason, because you kind of wash off all your bark that you spent 10 hours getting. So what I've taken to doing lately is just putting a little bit of something in there, just a little drizzle of something, because I don't want it to get dry. Maybe some of that margarine stuff on top, or maybe just a little drizzle of barbecue sauce, or just a splash of apple juice. I'm not real picky about it, just a little something, because you don't want it to dry out. And then, actually, I did learn this from Chris. This is a tip from Chris Lilly that I'll be happy to give you. When you wrap them snug, because you want to try to discourage steam. You know, where if you've got a big puffed up package, the ribs will be hanging with steam. What Chris showed me was you try to pack the foil down tightly on the rib. That way you get, I mean, you're still going to get that little bit of steaming, but it's not a big puffed up, you know, like we're cooking fish in the French way. What's that?
It's not boiling on the end.
Yeah, you hope anyway. So, I mean, I've gotten away. I know exactly what you're saying, and I've gotten away from it. It's been waves over the years. You know, I saw Bill Milroy one time. He used to do it, and Bill claims to have invented the wrapping with brown sugar and orange blossom honey and all this, but maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Bill goes back a long time. But he used to have this foil. He would wrap it up in foil. I saw him doing this, and he opened it up like a little funnel on the end and poured some apple juice in. I mean, it was pretty effective. It was a good way to do it. But I used to do that, but I've gotten away from adding that much liquid for what you're saying, because it kind of washes out the bark and the spices. I think the flavor from the spices hangs, but it's more about appearance. It kind of doesn't look that good. Yeah, for me with brisket, it's usually like kind of by temp, but it's got to make sure it's looking good. I mean, that's the theory for me of wrapping. Get the thing, be it ribs or a brisket, to looking really good. A nice bark developed. You can tell it's got a pretty good flavor. You can tell it's starting to get cooked. You don't want to go in there all still raw. So when it's looking really good. For a brisket, though, it's going to be in the 170, 180 range. I don't want to go too early. Some guys will try and wrap it when it weighs 100 or when it's 160 degrees. I want to go 170, even 180. But at that point, it's got everything it's going to get from being out in the smoke. So might as well get it going. So that's when I would wrap it in foil. So for me, it's about 180, and then I'll cook it to 200 plus. You got to feel it at that point. You know, poke it and make sure it's tender. Everyone's a little bit different, but not. Yeah, usually around 200, I'd start getting serious about taking it off. And they're all a little bit different, but around 200 is when it's going to be. And then for me, I always want them to rest. So I'm not worried about get it completely blown tender. If it's close, I'm good with it because I always want to put it in an ice chest and let it rest for a couple hours and maybe even more. Learned that from an old Texan. That's what I do, yeah. And then you know, we're talking an empty cooler, of course, and then I try not to. The ribs I do if I have to. Same with pork. The brisket's the only one I'm going to hold on purpose. I like to hold it. 2 hours is ideal. 4 is fine. 6 you can even get away with. The only thing is that if you're like at a cook-off, and I know, or catering even, if I know this brisket's done early and it's going to have to wait 6 hours, I'm okay with that, but I might pull it off at 195, knowing it's going to sit for that long. The theory about cooking a brisket, any of you guys been around long enough to remember a guy named Charlie Note, Knote. Howard, you might remember Charlie. He was that guy from downbound St. Louis, or Cape Girardeau, I think he was from. He was a meat scientist. He wrote that book, Barbecuing and Sausage Making Secrets. As a matter of fact, Ruthie was still involved a couple years ago. Charlie wrote this book before anybody wrote barbecue books. You know, they're just, that's the first barbecue book I ever got, and most of us, because they didn't exist. All these books we all get to write now, you know, they weren't out there. So Charlie wrote this book, crazy book. It's called Barbecue and Sausage Making Secrets. It's like a comb-bound book. If you see it out there, buy it. It's a tough read because he's all over the board. He wasn't a great writer. But Charlie was the first guy that got into the theory of what happens with barbecue, that I knew anyway. And this is pretty much 20 years ago. Charlie researched for us and told us that when you cook a brisket, it's not like cooking a tenderloin where you get it up to 130 degrees or 125 and it's done. You let it rest for 5 minutes and it's done and you eat it. Brisket's not like that. Complete different story. When we talk about the 200 degrees, that's just coincidence. What Charlie told us was the brisket begins to break down at 160 degrees. The collagen begins to break down at 160 degrees. At about 180 is when the moisture loss really kicks in. So, think about it. So that means if we could hold that brisket at 170 forever, we would be able to get it tender and it wouldn't get dry. And that's the theory for cooking a brisket. So what we do when we cook it up to 180, now it's had a lot of nice time in that tenderizing zone because from 160 to 180 takes a long time in a barbecue pit. At that point, at the 180, it's starting to dry out a little more aggressively. Now this isn't magic, but okay, so now I'm going to wrap it, get it up to 200 because I have no way to hold it at 175 for an extended period of time. It's just kind of not realistic to do. So at 180, I wrap it, bang, get it up to 200, throw it in the aluminum foil, throw it in the ice chest. Probably comes down to probably creeps up a couple degrees, but when you cook at a low temp there, it doesn't creep up that much. Probably comes back to 195, 190 pretty quick, and then reasonably soon it's back down to 180. Then it's going to hang. It's going to hang in that same zone. The meat doesn't care if it's on the cooker or hanging out in the ice chest. It's going to hang in that 180 to 160 zone for a long time. In the case of a 6-hour rest, it's going to be in that zone for hours and continue to get tender while it doesn't get dry. Understand all of that? I mean, it's deep theory. It's like science. I should put on my sign, everything I know about Chris Lilly and science. I'm really getting deep today. But sure, but keep your sham down. Keep the temp down. Yeah. Yeah, be fine. Be fine. In theory, you could in a sham you could probably somehow hold it at 175 for a day, and probably basically anybody messed around with sous vide? It's kind of what those guys are doing, where they shrink wrap the stuff and it hangs in this low temp water bath for a whole day. These short ribs, they never get above 145 degrees in a whole day, and they're tender. I mean, it's crazy. That's the extreme case of it. But it's kind of the same thing that what we're doing. So yeah, sham would be fine. But if it were me, I would plan on that. I would plan on a couple-hour hold. It's hard in the restaurant business, I know. But yeah, sham would be fine. Just like I said, try to keep the temp down. Don't let it get too high on you, and try not to be working out of it if you can. But it'll hang.
They're doing it good to base it, cooking it.
Remind me to get back there. But to me, basting is an excuse to open the lid. Basting is something now. If you're cooking on we're in South Carolina, the cradle of barbecue, right? If you're cooking on an old block pit and there's no lid or just a piece of cardboard laying over it, and you're out there drinking for 20 hours trying to cook this hog, in that case, have a bucket of mop, and every now and then go over and mop the hog, because it's going to get dry, and you got no closed environment, and you haven't pumped it with phosphates and all this crazy stuff that modern barbecue guys do. If you could doing that, yeah, have a bucket of mop over there. It's part of the culture, part of the procedure, by all means. If you're cooking on a big green egg like me, it's so moist in that environment, no mop is necessary. So the only reason I would open that lid and spritz or mop, to peak. That's the only, and that's what you see. New guys, you often talk to these new guys. Well, so every 45 minutes, I open the lid and I spritz it with apple juice and Jack Daniels. And we all know that stuff just rolls right off anyway. It doesn't do that much. And it's just an excuse to open it and peak. And you're doing more harm by opening the lid of your smoker. We all know that. That you're doing way more harm by opening that lid than you are by spritzing a little apple juice on it. So I think. Yeah, exactly. And somehow you have this theory that you're building this caramelization and everything. But meanwhile, you do yourself a whole lot more better by leaving the door closed, What was that, sir, about slicing a brisket? Well, if it's falling apart, you cooked it too much. Yeah, if it's falling apart, it's overcooked. Now, are you having trouble at 200 it's falling apart? For competition or for a restaurant for restaurant? Yeah, for restaurant, I wouldn't necessarily worry. 200 probably is too high of a temp. It's a good point. It probably is too high of a temp for a restaurant situation. So I would go less. For competition, we cook them to that tender, and we have like special, knives that are like sacredly held to. Well, the 2 hour will help that for sure. But again, in a restaurant setting, I probably would go 195. But really, you need to have a special knife that remains sharp and everybody has it. It's in its special place. You can't go get the knife out of the dishwashing machine that somebody was just chopping onions with and slice a tender brisket. You need to have the carving knife and kill the guy who tries to use it for anything else. It's just the nature of being a barbecue guy. Or cook it a little less and throw it on the slicer and slice it thin. I mean, there's guys doing that too. Any of you guys do that in a restaurant? They cook it to 180 and just throw it on the slicer and slice it paper thin. It's pretty good. It's a different product. Not what I like, but so yeah. I mean, 200 is definitely too high for the restaurant guys. I should have clarified that. Good one. Thank you.
I've seen in some of the books where you cook them in an aluminum pan. You recommend that?
I don't. The only people I ever knew that cooked in an aluminum pan were trying to keep their smoker clean.
I've seen that in some of the cookbooks. I will mention who.
Yeah? I don't know. I've never actually tried it.
Big name.
You're dying to tell us. I'm not getting involved. Those guys' Oaks cookbooks are all good. Everybody else's cookbooks are real good, too. These happen to be better, but, these two books, I didn't bring any books. I'm not going to sign any books today, except these two. They're going to be on the silent auction. So anybody buys those, I'll sign them for you. Hey, Howard, so you know that, too. I only got 2 cookbooks that I brought with. They're going to go on the silent auction tonight. So whoever buys them, I'll sign them for them. I work for Big Green Egg, but I'd have a hard time switching. I love the thing. I hope I never have to go work for somebody else because I really like the thing a lot. Before that, I had a Jedmaster, which I really liked a lot. It was just hard to clean. No, I don't think they do. But really, these stumps and spice wines and those square ones are really kind of the evolution of them. It's kind of it's kind of where they came from. I also am a big fan of Fast Eddie's cookers. Eddie's my buddy, but those pellet cookers are great. You throw the food in there and go to sleep. And come out and there it is. And for you restaurant guys, when you do pellet cooker, your guy can't screw up. I always tell people, Southern Pride and Old Hickory, they're great. And you come up with this system where I'm going to put a couple of oak logs in with the briskets and a piece of apple goes in with the ribs and all this. All good, as long as your guy puts that piece of apple in, and leaves the temp at 225. If your guy says, "Oh shit, I'm running late, I better turn the temp up to 275," and I'll forget about the apple, so I'll just throw it in now with the oak. Which of course that's there's a million things like that in the restaurant business you got to get fixed. But the pellet cooker just kind of cruises with a nice smell of smoke all the time. I smell barbecue.
I saw you on Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. You ate the big turkey breast.
Yeah, Smoking Guns in Kansas City.
You burn in this thing. Could you explain how much trimming has to be done on that?
Well, here's what I do, and it's pretty much what Phil did. Those guys are good guys there at Smoking Guns. What I do is I've taken the trimming my brisket, not so much the big top layer of fat, but I try to trim a whole lot out in between the two muscles, so that once the flat gets done, then I separate it and take the top off. And the flat gets wrapped up and goes in the cooler like we talked about. And then the point goes, I trim it up. Then I try to trim a lot of fat off of it then, re-season it and throw it back in. And it's generally not at the same temp, and it needs to get cooked to like 205, and then it needs a little rest too. So I'll kind of do what Phil did. I don't trim much. On a restaurant situation, that's pretty rough. I'd be trying to get points, just cases of points. I know they can get them in Kansas City. I don't know where you guys can get them outside of there. I'm not sure you can. So burn ends is a tough thing to have on the menu. I guess I might almost just part them all out before I cooked them in a restaurant.
Well, I don't have a restaurant. I'm like you. I just
Oh,
save that
okay.
for me.
Yeah, okay. In that case, yeah.
The good spot.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's what I do for sure. So, yeah, I'll cook the whole thing whole. Try to cut a lot of that fat out in between.
What's in between?
Yeah, it's a little tricky to do, but you'll get the hang of it. And then when you go to separate it, it's a whole lot easier. Because if you leave the whole thing together, and much like I was talking about the spare ribs, that big end of the brisket, if you don't kind of clean out some of that middle, it takes forever. This end over here is all cooked out and dry. It's tough for you restaurant guys. For restaurants, I'd probably consider flats, cooking flats. I'm not a big fan of that, but in a restaurant situation, it's the way to go. But make sure you get them with fat on there, man. Get big ones with a lot of fat on them. Don't let the guy sell you small ones and with no fat on them.
That's what you run into.
And then I would stagger them, I think. If you got your smoker running all the time anyway, I'd stagger them, cooking a few at a time, and not be scared to run out. And then have an option for your leftovers, What do you do with your leftover brisket, Paul?
Sell the next day.
Do you? Don't do that.
We use flats
Yeah.
and then cool them down and then slice them thin.
So you always cool them down. Oh, okay. So that's not a bad way to go.
I don't have a restaurant.
Oh, I thought you had a restaurant. Oh, okay.
It's just a small, most everything to do is kid.
Oh, okay. I thought you had a restaurant. So now slicing. I never did get back to slicing. With a whole brisket, sometimes I would cook them the whole thing in its entirety, but these days I've separated, put the point back in like we showed on that show, and so then it's pretty easy. Trim the fat off of that flat and look where the grain is and just slice against it, and then the point. And then the point, cube it up, or I don't know. In a restaurant, I'd probably just get flats and just not deal with it. Burn ends, unless you're in Kansas City, you don't have to have burn ends. And if you're not going to serve good ones, so we say the same thing in the contest world. If they're not really good, don't put them in the box. So you'd have a hard time cooking enough briskets outside of Texas or Kansas City. You'd have a hard time cooking enough of them to generate enough burn ends. Now, Jeff at Oklahoma Joe's, what he used to do would have burn end night on Wednesdays. So he'd save up his points all week and cook them, and on Wednesday would be burn end night. That's not a bad idea. And did I miss anything? Anything fast?
Burn
Yeah, the fatty, the part that goes this way, up on top. There's two muscles. There's a nice clean one that's looks almost like a flank steak, a big flank steak, and then there's the other one on top that's a lot more fatty and a lot looser, and that's what we call the point, and that's what traditionally would be made into burnt ends.